The German U-boats in World War II were designed to operate mostly on the surface and submerge only for evasion or for daylight attacks. However, the continued Allied inventions in the sonar technology forced the U-boats to spend more and more time underwater. When submerged, U-boats ran on electric engines, and its powerful diesel engines were switched off as they were air-breathing and useless underwater. When running on electric engines, U-boats had very limited range and speed, and it needed to surface to run its diesels in order to recharge its batteries. In 1940, when the German army defeated the Netherlands, a stroke of luck landed up on the German Navy, namely the Dutch invention the Germans called somewhat rudely the Snorkel. The Dutch Navy had been experimenting with a simple pipe system which enabled a periscoping submarine to operate its diesels and thus have almost unlimited underwater range. Earlier experiments with this idea by the Dutch Navy had begun earlier in the interwar period. The Snorkel allowed U-boats to run on diesel engines even when underwater. This was simply a pipe with a valve on one end which extended above sea level while the boat was submerged. The tube consisted of an intake and exhaust pipe, where outside air was drawn into the U-boat and exhaust gases expelled from the exhaust pipe. The shut-off valve prevented seawater from entering the intake if the mouth of the tube dipped below the surface. Being able to run its diesels underwater was a huge tactical advantage for the German Navy. It was not until 1943, when more and more U-boats were lost to the Allied counterattack, that the system fell into favor with the German Navy High Command. The Snorkel played a vital role in the history of the Battle of Atlantic. As Allied radar grew more potent, U-boats were forced to submerge and travel underwater to escape detection from Allied radar. Not only were they faster, but more importantly, they eluded Allied radar. This allowed U-boats crossing the Bay of Biscay to travel underwater with relative safety from the Allied aircraft. The first boat to be fitted with the Snorkel was U-58, which experimented with the equipment in the Baltic during the summer of 1943, but operational boats didn't start to use it until early 1944. Even as late as June of 1944, only about half of the boats stationed in the French bases had Snorkels fitted. Despite its advantages, Snorkel were entirely faultless and had to be used with close supervision. The intake pipe did not lead directly to the diesel engines. This was to prevent unnecessary stoppages, and it was common for the intake valve to open and shut as the ocean waves swept over the Snorkel head, periodically submerging it. Instead, the intake pipe led the inside of the boat, providing breathing air for the crew as well as the engines. The engines would draw air from the interior of the boat as usual, where the entire volume of the boat itself acted as an air buffer. In the event that the valve was suddenly closed, the diesels could run on for a short time, but this cannot be sustained for long. If the air supply was lost, the diesels had to be immediately disengaged to prevent the entire internal air from being extracted. Obviously, this would have catastrophic consequences for the crew. Thus, during the initial installations, the air supply was constantly monitored in order to stop the diesels whenever the valve closed, but this was later automated. Another problem with running the diesel submerged is the engine noise. As diesel engines were much noisier than their electrical counterpart, this meant that the U-boat's hydrophones could not be used. The U-boat still had to rely on the limited view provided by the periscope, but to add to the problem, the periscope could not be used at speeds of over 6 knots. This was due to excessive vibrations on the periscope due to the forward motion of the boat. The wake and diesel exhaust fumes emitted at the snorkel head also adversely affected vision from the periscope. Later, the position of the snorkel head was relocated to the rear of the boat so as not to interfere with the periscope. Finally, Allied radar was still sensitive enough to be able to detect an object as small as the snorkel head. Although this was much more difficult compared to a surfaced U-boat, Allied reports indicated that a surfaced U-boat could be detected up to a distance of 10 kilometers, whereas a snorkel head could be detected at only about 5 kilometers. Later, snorkel heads were coated with radar-absorbing materials known as tarmatte. It was claimed that this reduced radar signature by up to 90%, although there were no definite tests. In general, snorkel designs comprised of 2 basic types. The earlier types were hinged snorkels with the base set into an axle while the tube was raised and lowered like an arm. Once extended, it was lugged into position by a large clamp. When in the lowered position, it lay flat in a long shallow well on the upper deck. The hinged snorkel was operated by hydraulics, for which there was no manual control if the hydraulics failed. The second type is the telescopic snorkel. As its name implies, it was extended and retracted vertically, much like a periscope. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you're subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.